Your phone starts buzzing at 8:52 a.m. By 9:15, there's a line out the door of your bank. Not a protest, not a robbery, just people. 40 of them, then 60, standing on the sidewalk of a town of 11,000, waiting to pull their money out. Nobody can tell you why it started. Someone posted something. Someone repeated it at the diner. By the time it reached the barbershop, it wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a fact. And the fact was, your bank is in trouble. It isn't, not yet, but it's about to be because of what you're standing next to right now. A vault holding a fraction of what your depositors think is inside it. 6 months ago, you spent your entire life savings, $4 million, to buy this bank. One branch, one drive-through, a vault that hasn't been touched since 1987. You walked in that first morning and felt something close to pride. People were going to trust you with their money. Your accountant explained the rest of it over coffee, almost casually. Of the $60 million sitting in deposit accounts, you're legally required to keep almost none of it sitting in that vault. The rest is already gone, out the door as car loans, mortgages, a tractor loan to a farmer 3 streets over. You didn't buy a vault full of money, you bought a vault full of promises, and you're the one who has to keep them. Now it's 9:15 on a Tuesday, and 60 people want their promises kept at the same time. Your teller's hands are shaking. You do the math in your head twice, hoping you get a different number the second time. You don't. If everyone in that line cashes out today, you cannot pay them. Not because you did anything wrong, not because you stole a dollar, because the money was never sitting there to begin with. It never is, in any bank, anywhere. This is the part nobody explains to you before you own one. A bank is not a vault. A bank is a bet that everyone won't ask for their money back on the same Tuesday. You get on the phone. You call in a favor, an emergency credit line from a larger bank, one you'll be paying interest on for years. It arrives just in time. The line outside thins out by 3 p.m. once word spreads that people are actually getting paid. Crisis over. You survive level 1. But you don't walk away from that Tuesday clean. You walk away with a new, permanent fear sitting in your chest, and a new credit line hanging over your head like a debt you can never fully forget. So you decide the answer is simple. Get bigger. More branches, more deposits, more cushion between you and another Tuesday like that one. You have no idea that bigger doesn't mean safer. It just means the next disaster wears a different mask. 2 years later, you're not a single branch anymore. 6 locations, $400 million in deposits, a real board, a compliance officer. You've started sleeping through the night again. You tell yourself the fear from that first Tuesday is behind you now. You have reserves. You have regulation. You did the responsible thing with your extra cash. You parked a huge chunk of it in government bonds, the safest asset that exists. You could not lose. Then your chief risk officer walks into your office on a Thursday afternoon holding a single sheet of paper, and her face tells you something before she says a word. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates 0.5 point that morning. Ordinary news, the kind of headline you'd scroll past. Except every one of those safe bonds you bought 2 years ago just lost value. Not because the government defaulted, not because anything broke, but simply because rates moved and your old bonds became less attractive overnight. On paper, you're still fine. You tell yourself that twice. But if your depositors get nervous and start pulling cash the way that town did back at level 1, you'd be forced to sell those bonds at a loss just to pay them. And a paper loss becomes a real one the second you're forced to sell it. This is not a hypothetical scenario someone invented for a video. This is exactly the mechanism that took down several American banks in 2023. Banks that looked completely healthy on a Monday and were gone by Friday. You did everything right this time. You followed every rule your accountant never taught you back at level 1. And you are still one bad news cycle away from a second Tuesday. Your CRO gives you 2 options before she leaves the room. Sell the bonds now, lock in the loss, and raise fresh capital to cover it. Or hold them, hope rates fall, and pray nothing spooks your depositors in the meantime. You choose to sell. You take the loss on the chin, raise capital, and live to fight another quarter. It cost you almost a third of what you'd built, but you keep your doors open, and this time nobody lines up outside them. You learned something at level 2 that level 1 never taught you. Safety in banking was never about how much money you're holding. It's about how fast people can ask for it back, and whether what you're holding can turn into cash fast enough to meet them. You survived being careful. Now you're about to find out what happens when careful isn't even the game anymore. Your bank now operates across an entire state, $9 billion in assets. You're not in the news for risk anymore. You're in the news for growth. Your CFO slides a single number across a table during your Monday meeting. Not your profit, not your revenue. Just one number, 3.2%. That's your net interest margin, the gap between what you pay depositors, almost nothing, maybe 0.5%, and what you charge borrowers, maybe 4% on a loan. That tiny gap multiplied across billions of dollars is your entire business. Not the building, not the logo, that gap. Then your phone rings. It's one of your regional managers. A rival bank 2 blocks from your busiest branch just launched a 4.5% savings account, more than double what you're paying your own depositors. And your depositors are already moving. You have 2 choices, and neither of them is free. Match the rate, and that beautiful 3.2% margin you built your empire on starts bleeding out in real time. Refuse to match it, and you watch your customers walk 2 blocks down the street to hand their money to someone else. You spend that week doing what you never expected to do as a banker. You go to war over 0.5 percentage point. You raise your rate, but only to new accounts, buying yourself room to keep your existing depositors loyal without gutting your margin completely. It's not a clean win. Your CFO tells you flatly that your margin is thinner this quarter than it's ever been. But you keep your depositors, and you finally understand what nobody tells you when you dream about owning a bank. It was never about being trusted. It's about being the toll booth, standing between people who have money and people who need it, and charging a toll on both sides without either one fully noticing. You survived the rate war, but surviving it teaches you something uncomfortable. The bigger you get, the more this becomes a game of inches, and inches at the next level come with a lot more zeros attached. You're commanding a national bank now, $200 billion in assets. Politicians take your calls. Your name is on a building downtown. But the thing that got you here, leverage, is quietly sitting in the room with you every single day, and it doesn't care about your name on the building. Here's what almost nobody outside banking understands. Of your $200 billion in assets, only about $16 billion is actually yours, the shareholders' cushion. The other $184 billion is other people's money, deposits, borrowed funds, debt. For every single dollar you truly own, you're controlling $12 that belongs to someone else. Then the report lands on your desk that you've been dreading since level 1. Loan defaults have spiked, not by some catastrophic number, by 8%. To anyone outside this office, 8% sounds manageable, a bad quarter, nothing more. But you're leveraged 12-1, and an 8% loss on your total assets doesn't cost you 8% of your capital, it wipes out all of it. You sit with that number longer than you'd like to admit. This is the exact mechanism that ended Lehman Brothers in 2008. Not because they lost most of their money, but because they lost a fraction of it, and that fraction was more than their cushion could absorb. You call an emergency board meeting that night. You freeze new lending. You sell off assets you didn't want to sell, at prices you didn't want to accept, just to rebuild your cushion before the quarter closes. It works, barely. You end the quarter standing, but thinner than you've ever been, and every regulator in the country now has your bank's name highlighted on a watch list. You built an empire on leverage, and you just found out that the same leverage that made you rich in the good years is a loaded gun pointed at your own head in the bad ones. The bigger the bank, you realize, the smaller the margin for error. You think you've seen the worst of it. You haven't. At the next level, the danger stops being about whether you survive and starts being about who else gets pulled down with you. You've crossed into a different universe. Your institution holds over $2 trillion in assets. You are one of maybe 30 banks on Earth that regulators quietly refer to as systemically important. Translation: if you fail, you don't just hurt your shareholders, you threaten the entire financial system. It's 3 a.m. when your phone rings. It's not a customer. It's a senior official from the Treasury Department. A bad trading position has your bank bleeding capital fast. And instead of letting you fail the way a small-town bank would fail, they're calling to ask what it would take to keep you standing. Sit in that for a second. You are so large, so wired into everything else, that the government itself cannot afford to let you collapse. This is what people mean when they say too big to fail, the strangest paradox in modern finance. The bigger and more reckless you become, the more protected you are, because your failure would hurt everyone else more than it hurts you. But you learn fast that this is not comfort. It's a hostage situation, and you're the one holding the hostages without ever meaning to. Being too big to fail doesn't mean you can't fail. It means when you do, everyone pays for it. Taxpayers, pensioners, small businesses who never banked with you a single day in their lives. You spend that week in rooms with people who can end careers with one sentence, negotiating terms that will keep your bank alive at a cost someone else will quietly absorb. You survive. Your name stays on the building. But you understand now that risk never actually disappeared at any level you've climbed. It just got transferred, quietly, onto shoulders that never agreed to carry it. You think you've reached the top. You haven't. There's one level left. And that isn't about owning a bank anymore. It's about owning the thing every bank stands on. Now you're close to something almost nobody at level 1 could even conceive of. You don't just own a bank. You sit near the institution that creates the foundation every other bank stands on, the central banking system. You're not printing money with a machine. It's quieter than that. You're in a room where a handful of people decide to move one number, the interest rate banks charge each other overnight, by 1/4 percentage point. That's the entire meeting. 20 minutes, one number, a few signatures. That 1/4 point leaves the room and within days ripples into every mortgage, every business loan, every credit card statement in the country. People you will never meet will pay more or less for their homes because of a decision made in a room they'll never see. And sitting in that room, it finally hits you. The thing in your pocket, the number in everyone's banking app, the wealth the entire world spends its life chasing, was never a fixed physical thing. It's a policy decision, a trust exercise that only works because millions of people agree, without ever discussing it out loud, to believe a number on a screen has value. This is the moment everything from level 1 to level 6 finally connects. It was never about vaults or bonds or leverage ratios or being too big to fail. Every single level was the same game played at a different size. The small-town banker sweating over 60 depositors and the trillion-dollar institution negotiating with the Treasury at 3 a.m. are doing the exact same thing. They're both renting out other people's belief at a small margin over and over at increasing scale. At level 1, you owned a building full of promises. By level 6, you're standing near influence over an entire nation's confidence. But here's the part that should actually stay with you. At every level, the thing you never once owned was safety. Level 1 nearly broke you over 60 people in a parking lot. Level 4 nearly broke you over 8%. Even level 6 runs entirely on a belief that could shift in a single afternoon. So here's the real question this was always building toward. Not what level do you want to reach, but knowing now how fragile every single level actually is, what are you doing with your own money today that's quietly running on a promise you couldn't keep if 100 people showed up asking for it back at once? Go back and think about level 1 for a second. That fear in the parking lot, that's not just a bank's problem. That's what happens to anyone, at any size, who mistakes it hasn't happened yet for it can't happen. If this opened your eyes even a little, you already know what to do next. Subscribe, because next time we go inside the level almost nobody survives.